Om. 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 Om Bhuvah Swaha Tatsaviturvarenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yo Nah Prachodayat. Namaste and my sincerest greetings to all the esteemed scholars and all my dear brothers and sisters watching and listening to this excellent event. Thank you for inviting me on this platform to discuss the relevance and application of Chapter 6 of the Satyarth Prakash, the science of government in the modern context. The goal of government and the supreme ruler. The goal of the ruler of a state and his government is the happiness and the welfare of the people. This is achieved through upholding the law, or dharma, which is the ultimate authority over secondary man-made laws. The law is above the ruler and all members of the government. The supreme ruler, Paramatma, is the only true king. His law is paramount. Drawing inspiration from the Vedas and history, Maharshi Dayanand envisaged a one-world government in modern times where all the world's peoples would be in the state of utmost happiness and their welfare would be taken care of by everyone adhering to the law or dharma. The righteous, irreproachable governors of the world upholding the law and dispensing divine justice according to the law would ensure this. They, being earthly kingly ministerial representatives, however, would all be subordinate to Paramatma, the only true king, the ultimate dispenser of true justice and happiness according to the law. So how did Maharshi come to make such bold statements? Why did he feel it necessary to make it? And what relevance does it have in our modern day world? The British government in India. Firstly, before I start this evening's lecture, in which I will attempt to answer these questions, I would like you to cast your minds back to the time period of 1874 to 1875, when Maharshi Dayanand Saraswati ji wrote and eventually published his monumental work, the Satyarth Prakash. The socio-political state of Aryavart was terrible. The ferocious 1857 War of Independence, which had surprised and shaken the British powers to the core, had nevertheless been ruthlessly put down. This was done firstly through brutal, gory force against freedom fighters and ordinary people. Secondly, through the use of princely and other homegrown traitors. And thirdly, of course, through anti-Indian propaganda. So when writing the Satyarth Prakash, and more specifically the 6th Samvalas on the science of government, Swami then must have had all these developments that had taken place under the British Crown in mind. With clear references to the Vedas, and in particular the Manusmriti, the original law code of the whole of humanity, Maharshi then sought to counter the inhumane activities of the British government. He strove to inspire Aryas to throw off the chains of imperialism and to establish Swarajya, self-rule, so that Aryavart could take up its rightful role again as the true Chakravarti Samrajya, in which all its global subjects could enjoy the maximum happiness and welfare. Taking each of the political developments undertaken by the British Crown after the 1857 First War of Independence in turn, let's analyze how Maharshi Dayanand systematically proposed a strong Vedic alternative to each, and whether they have any relevance and application in our modern society. Turning first to an ideal state structure in British eyes, in 1858, following the tumultuous attack on the East India Company, this involved transferring to the British Crown under Queen Victoria all the company's authority and creating a clear governmental framework under the 1858 Government of India Act. Under the Act, the new posts of Viceroy and the Secretary of State for India were created, the latter being responsible for the Indian government and answerable directly to the British Parliament in London. The Secretary of State was assisted by newly created civil servants of the Indian Civil Service, who were almost all British. Together, they controlled vast territories previously under company rule, and most importantly, collected vast amounts of tax, largely in the form of land revenue on behalf of the British Crown. These civil servants would have overseen the loot of the vast Mughal treasury of the last Mughal ruler, Bahadur Shah, who was later exiled, and the extensive total confiscation of lands belonging to the 1857 rebels. Where were the Kshatriyas, the safeguarders of Aryavat, the descendants of great warriors like Bhagwan Sri Ram, Bhagwan Sri Krishna, Maharana Pratap, and so many others in the face of all this, some may ask? There were indeed many brave sons and daughters still left, but unfortunately, the princes who ruled over them and 1/3 of the territory of British India were largely disloyal and indifferent to the plight of their subjects and fellow men. This was because, due to greed and the love of luxury, they had fallen under the spell of the British, and the princely states were essentially puppet states controlled by them. So while these westernized princes spent their treasury's wealth intended for the state's development and their people's welfare, Indian people were in fact greatly impoverished. To cap it all, Queen Victoria was 1 year away from being proclaimed the Empress of India, even though she had never and would never visit India and knew virtually nothing about it. To Maharshi Dayanand in 1875, nearly 20 years after his invaluable contributions to the 1857 independence campaign, and knowing as he did of the long list of illustrious world emperors of Aryavat that once ruled over the greatest and the most harmonious global empire, he must have been eager to counter these painful turn of events with Vedic truths. Vedic government. Firstly, in the 6th Samullas of the Satyarth Prakash, Maharshi Dayanand emphasized that only Paramatma was the true ruler of everything and everyone, and we look to him alone for true guidance regarding government. In Rig Veda, for example, we pray to Paramatma thus: Rijuniti no varuno mitro nayatu vidwan aryama daivehi shajoshaha, which means, may the all-knowing, the all-surpassing, the all-loving, the all-controlling God, who is the friend of all, through his divine qualities, lead us to sound policy. Acknowledging that Paramatma is the king of all kings and that his authority is enshrined in the 4 Veda, Maharshi Dayanand directly challenged the British Crown's biblical assertion that God in the form of Jesus Christ was the supreme ruler. Turning to who should be Paramatma's earthly representative, the Maharshi quotes from 2 Vedic sources. First, the Atharva Veda, which says that the king should be a very powerful, unbeaten conqueror of foes, the paramount sovereign, most enlightened, worthy, possessing the most noble qualities, accomplishments, character, and disposition, who is thoroughly worthy of the homage, trust, and respect of all. Then, invoking the democratic free will of the people, he quotes the Yajurveda, which says, "O you learned men, proclaim that man with one voice, your king, the president and the head of the state, who is just, impartial, well-educated, cultured, and friend of all. In this way alone shall ye attain universal sovereignty, be greater than all, manage the affairs of the state, obtain political eminence, acquire wealth, and rid the world of its enemies." The king. The Vedic king is a Kshatriya, by Varna, Maharshi reveals. Quoting from Manusmriti, his knowledge, culture, and piety are as perfect as those of a Brahmin, which will enable him to govern the country with perfect justice. Of his personal qualities, Manusmriti says that he should be as powerful as electricity, as dear to his people's hearts as their very breath. Just in his dealings as a judge, one who enlightens people's minds by the spread of knowledge, justice, and righteousness, consumes wickedness like fire, makes the country rich and prosperous as a treasurer keeps his treasury full, is powerful and majestic like the sun, keeps the people in order and awe, and in whom no one in the whole world dares to look with a stern eye. In this context, Queen Victoria's thoroughly undemocratic rule, which brought terror, injustice, and loot into the lives of Indians, coupled with her lack of a true, rigorous, disciplined, moral, and scientific Kshatriya education, made her a truly ineligible Empress of India, let alone world sovereign. Since 1950, the Indian Republic has thankfully replaced the distant, irrelevant British monarch by an Indian president who, under the Indian Constitution, has the responsibility and authority to defend and protect the Constitution of India and its rule of law. Any action taken by the executive or legislature, entities of the Constitution, only become law after the president's assent, and only if they are constitutional. In this way, the Indian president is the foremost, most empowered, and prompt defender of the Constitution. Although not quite the Kshatriya king that Maharshi had envisaged, the Swadeshi Indian president, albeit a ceremonial figurehead, is a vast improvement on the foreign, unelected British monarch. 3 chief offices. Then, according to the Maharshi, once the king is duly elected democratically to the office of head of state by the people, appointments to the other 3 chief offices, firstly, commander-in-chief of the forces, secondly, head of the civil government, thirdly, minister of justice, should be made. He should choose those persons who are well-versed in all the 4 Veda and the Shastras, conversant with all the sciences and philosophies, devout, and have perfect control over their desires, passions, and possess a noble character. 3 assemblies. Then, according to the injunction in the Rig Veda, 3 assemblies, religious, legislative, educational, should be convened in order to discuss and decide subjects that concern it. And all men should be adorned with knowledge, culture, righteousness, independence, and wealth, and made happy. These assemblies should consist of around 10 members each, he says, who are well versed in the 4 Veda, the science of dharma, the true system of government, keen logicians, masters of language, the divine science which consists of the knowledge of the nature, character, and attributes of God, and the arts of elocution and debate. They should have such high virtues as self-control or truthful character, attained by always practicing yoga, meditating on God, morning and evening, and an uncontrolled mind and senses of a soul. This can, if an uncontrolled mind exists and one's senses are not controlled, then the king can never keep the people under control. Assembly members must also belong to the first three orders: brahmacharya, celibacy; grihasth, married life; vanprasth, renunciation. Assembly, lawmakers. Being scholars of the Ved, their law should be considered of the highest authority. And the Maharshi asserts that the leader and other members of the assemblies are obliged to abide by the just laws harmoniously passed by the assemblies, even if it is made up of just 3 such learned men. Everyone, including members of the assemblies, should subordinate themselves to the laws that are calculated to promote general well-being, but should be free in matters relating to individual well-being. Those laws, though, decided by ignorant men, however, many in number, should be disobeyed, as their laws are the cause of hundreds of kinds of sin and vice. The king's senior ministers. In addition to assembly members, Manu instructs the king to appoint 7 or 8 good, righteous, and clever ministers who are natives of the country. Again, who are thoroughly conversant with the Ved and the Shastras, very brave, of impeccable judgment, from good families, and well tested. He must constantly and daily consult with them on state affairs, such as peace, war, defense, offensive action when necessary, the proper management of the state's internal affairs, the exchequer and the army, and the pacification of the newly conquered countries. The king's junior ministers. Other ministers and clever officers needed for the transaction of the business of the state, who are of great integrity, highly intellectual, of resolute minds, of great organizing power, and of vast experience, should also be given positions involving great responsibility and risk, whilst timid and faint-hearted men should only be employed for the administration of internal affairs. The king's ambassador. The king should then, according to Manusmriti, appoint a very politically astute, extremely patriotic and brave, highly intelligent and eloquent ambassador of an irreproachable, pure character, who can adapt himself to the manners and customs of different countries at any time, and who can read the innermost thoughts of others. He should be able to foretell future developments and events by observing the expression of faces and other significant signs and acts of others, and should be well versed in all of the Shastras. Interplay between different limbs of government. How Manu envisaged the interplay between the different limbs of government was that ministers would administer and enforce the law justly, the king would control the treasury and other state affairs, the ambassador would oversee peace and war, and all this would be done under the supervision of the assembly. In this way, the king's work and that of governance would be undertaken with ease. Following the Atharvaved injunction that the 3 assemblies, military councils, and the army should work harmoniously together to carry on the government of a country, the king is obliged to ascertain the individual opinion of each of his ministers and other members of the assembly, and abide by the decision of the majority and do what is beneficial for him as well as others. In this way, no single individual has absolute power. The king, who is the president of the assemblies, and the assemblies themselves should be interdependent on each other. Both should be controlled by the people, who in turn should be governed by the assembly. Such mutual harmony and cooperation would see rulers never going against the voice of the people, nor people and ministers doing anything against the wish of the sovereign. Having such an interdependent system prevents the occurrence of an autocratic king. According to Shatpad Brahman, if a despotic ruler reigns by centralizing power in his hands only, he will selfishly impoverish and oppress the people like a tiger, and he will rob the rich through unjust punishment. The interdependent king and his government, however, in contrast, constantly devoted to the welfare of the people, can only ensure everyone's perpetual happiness. Decentralization of government. Bringing government to the people through decentralization is, Maharshi says, a key part to ensuring this happiness. Following Manusmriti, he advocates the creation of administrative offices in the midst of 2, 3, 5, and 100 villages, where a certain number of officials should undertake government business. Lofty, roomy, beautiful town halls should be erected in every big town, where erudite, experienced council members can deliberate over town affairs and make laws for the people's welfare, education, and enlightenment. The appointed administrators of 1, 10, 20, 100, 1,000, 10,000 towns daily should apprise each other from the bottom up privately of all crimes committed within his jurisdiction. The administrator of 10,000 towns should then report to an assembly which governs the affairs of 100,000 townships, and all such assemblies to the Supreme International Assembly representing the whole world. Administration of the decentralization of government. With such decentralization, keeping a tight grip of its administration and law and order may be difficult. For this reason, Maharshi advocates, following Manusmriti, that 2 presiding officials should be appointed over every 10,000 villages. One should preside over their administration, the other should tour all over the area with trustworthy detectives of all ranks in order to diligently and sometimes secretly inspect the work and conduct of all the magistrates, government officials, and the people. Those honoring their duties will be praised, but those not faithfully discharging them will be punished by the king without leniency. Bribe takers will have all their possessions confiscated and will be banished. Such a severe punishment will deter other state officials from doing wrong. To prevent state officials from being tempted by bribery, the state should pay them well for their services, annually or monthly, enough to keep them in comfort and enough to make them rich even. The pension of retired state officials should equal half his pay and be lifelong, and if qualified and worthy, his children and wife should be properly honoured or given government appointments and subsistence allowances according to their qualifications. The Indian Westminster model. Under British colonial rule, however, there wasn't the same fair democratic interplay between the different arms of the administration as we have just seen in the Vedic system. Corruption and bribery was also rife. The government of the Raj consisted wholly of British officials and was headed by a British viceroy and the appointed British members of his council. Each of British India's 11 provinces had its own British governor, assisted by similar provincial legislative councils of appointed British officials. Although there was also a small number of Indian council members who were part of the local elite, they were appointed solely for consultative purposes. However, due to the pressure of the Swarajya movement on the British government, inspired by Maharshi Dayanand's visionary book, the Satyarth Prakash, fully elected provincial legislatures who could appoint their own native Indian governments were seen in the majority of the provinces towards the end of British rule. Although post-independence, the Indian government is still modelled after the Westminster system, the democratic interplay of different houses and arms of government by Indians for Indians is to a large extent thanks to the campaigning work of Maharshi Dayanand and the Arya Samaj for a democratic government. Much work, however, still needs to be done regarding the accountability, transparency of governance, especially in the terms of anti-corruption. The Raj Purohit. Lastly, as part of the Vedic administration, the king should have a spiritual guide, a Raj Purohit to perform hom and yaj, suitable for different seasons and other religious duties for him in the palace. He should provide selfless service to the state by mentoring the royal household, educating princes, guiding the king on the path of dharma, providing advice on matters of state welfare, even maintaining the kingdom's security by being actively involved in battles. The Raj Purohit should be a master of dharma and his senses and should advise the king and his whole administration to diligently shun the 18 ensnaring vices. The 18 vices emanating from the love of pleasure. The first 10 come from the love of pleasure, which are hunting, gaming, gambling, sleeping by day, gossiping, talking about sensual subjects, the excessive company of women, intoxicants, saying unkind or hard words, and useless roaming around. The 18 vices emanating from anger. The last 8 come from anger, and these are tale-bearing, violence, malevolence, envy, detraction from one's character, spending money on sinful purposes, saying unkind or hard words, and inflicting unjustified punishment. He should advise that an addict of pleasure vices loses his kingdom, wealth, power, and character, while an addict of anger vices may even lose his life. The king and his administration should eradicate the root of all these vices in themselves. And the root of all these vices is egotistical self-love, and instead develop a good character, a noble disposition, and devote themselves to the practice of virtuous deeds. Secularism and inequality. During British colonial times, the function of the Raj Purohit advisor, however, was abolished, as the services of learned men versed in Hindu and Islamic scriptures were rendered obsolete by separate religious laws, codified into their legislation by European scholars. The British also introduced the false concept of secularism that still exists in India today, that claims on the one hand to separate the state and religion and provide for a common law, but on the other promotes discord between communities by differentiating and administering people based on their personal religion. It is this lack of uniformity in administering spiritual matters and laws equally that has led many to campaign today for a uniform civil code and the Indian constitution to be amended and the word secularism to be removed and be replaced by the official declaration in the constitution that India is a Hindu Rashtra, and so guided by its spiritual guides. If this succeeds, then the important guiding Raj Purohit role in government, as envisaged by Maharshi Dayanand, may indeed return. The king's consort. A key contributor to the king becoming a master of senses would be the king's consort. She should be of a Kshatriya varna, born of a high family, endowed with beauty and other excellent qualities, be dear to his heart, blessed with charming manners, and equal to him in knowledge, acquisitions, accomplishments, and of a like temperament. They should marry after the king has completed his studies as a brahmachari and after settling the affairs of the state. This wife, with excellent qualities, should be his only wife, and so the king should never look lustfully at another woman. Disciplined daily routine of the Vedic king. The continuous and disciplined daily routine of the king would also assist his mastery of his senses. Maharshi Dayanand says that he should get up early in the morning, attend to his daily necessities, worship God, perform home himself, or have it done by his Raj Purohit, consult with his ministers, inspect and review the various measures adopted by them, inspect his troops, cheer their spirits, inspect stables of horses and elephants, cow buyers, etc., arms and ammunition stores, hospitals and the treasury. In short, inspect everything with his own eyes and point out shortcomings, and in so doing, promote the welfare of his people. The king should go to the gymnasium, take physical exercise, and at noon enter his private apartments to dine with his wife. His food should be well tested and be health, strength, energy, and intellect promoting. It should consist of various kinds of eatables, drinks, and sweets, juicy and fragrant dishes, as well as condiments, sauces, etc., that may keep him free from disease. Maharshi states, following Manu, that if a king faithfully discharges all these duties according to a disciplined daily regime, he is freed from all taint of sin and shall attain the supreme state. What is interesting to note, in contrast, in contrast to the Vedic king's mastery of the senses and dutiful disciplined daily life, was the very intemperate lifestyle of the British colonizers. Alcohol, as historical studies show, was free-flowing during British rule. And from the viceroy down to the lowly administrator, most were addicted to the above-mentioned vices of pleasure and anger to different degrees. The collapse of the British Empire could in part stem from this mass sensuality, neglect of duty, and mental and physical weakness. To its credit, in keeping with Manusmriti's injunctions, both the people of India and its state administrators, since 2014, for the most part, have in earnest strived to become real disciplined yogis through Indian government's designation of the 21st of June as International Yoga Day. Furthermore, the promotion of yoga and Vedic studies by the government can only but help in the gradual creation of a truly Vedic government in Aryavat, where its government and people will hopefully live in happy harmony, having mastered their senses. The British legal system in India. After the 1857 war, the British restructured the Indian legal system, which was based on the Mughal legal structure. In 1861, the draconian Indian Penal Code, which is still in force in India today, was enacted to restore British control over law and order. And in 1862, 3 provincial high courts in the capitals of the 3 presidency regions of Bengal, Bombay, and Madras were established. A hierarchy of lower courts reported to the high courts, and litigants had the right to take appeals from these courts to the Privy Council in London. Over the coming decades, other high courts were added to this framework, operating in the non-presidency regions, such as the Allahabad High Court of the United Provinces. In 1864, the use of Indian legal experts, as mentioned above, in the courts was also abandoned. These figures were replaced by legal texts and glossaries of Hindu and Muslim law, most of which had been compiled by European scholars. In this sense, Indian religious identities and practices became increasingly codified, albeit in a European manner, with little or no regard to indigenous scholarship and authentic texts. The Vedic legal system. Witnessing all this, Maharshi Dayanand advocated a strong legal system within a Vedic administrative system based on Vedic lines where there would be perfect adherence to divine law. In describing how it should be administered, he drew extensively, but not exclusively, from the 8th and 9th chapters of the Manusmriti. Regarding this ideal legal system, he re-emphasizes in the 6th Sammalas that the law alone, being dharma or right, is the real king, the dispenser of justice, the disciplinarian, as it ensures that the four classes and orders discharge their respective duties properly. It maintains order and is their protector day and night. If rightly administered, it creates happiness. If not, it ruins the king, causing corruption and disorder. So the fear-inspiring law, administered by a just and learned man, prevents people from committing crimes and from going astray, and so creates happiness. Maharshi further goes on to quote that great is the power and majesty of the law, as only a king who is wise, truthful, thoughtful, restrained, highly intellectual, and very clever in the attainment of virtue, wealth, and righteous desires can rightly administer it. Now, if he is sensual, lazy, crafty, malevolent, mean, and low-minded, ignorant and unjust, and so swerves from the right path, the law will destroy him. 18 types of lawsuits. The law, then, should be justly administered by the king, the court, and the judges daily. 18 types of lawsuits can be heard and judged impartially according to the Dharmashastras, law books of rishis, and in their absence, the ever-evolving laws of the land, framed to promote the welfare of the rulers and the ruled. These 18 causes of disputes surround issues pertaining to debt, deposit, sale of goods owned by another, aiding and abetting crime, refusal to return a loan, non-payment, inadequate payment of wages, sale or purchase, the owner of an animal and the animal's keeper, boundary disputes, assault, slander, larceny, burglary and dacoity, violence, adultery, disregard of conjugal duties, disputes about inheritance, all forms of gambling, and finally, murder. Duty of judges. Correct justice must be delivered by the judge's bench. Failure to do so, through remaining silent or a false verdict, is a sin and ultimately self-destructive. In cases of partiality, blame is apportioned in equal quarters to the party in the cause, to his witnesses, to all the judges, assembly members, and to the presiding judge, president of the assembly. So a correct verdict of condemnation, praise, punishment, or honor must be made by the bench to escape blame. Unjust condemnation and punishment destroys the reputation and honor of the innocent and causes great misery and intense suffering. Divine justice, which like the truest friend, however, never forsakes a man, even after death. Duty of witnesses. Witnesses in lawsuits themselves must also be beyond reproach. To be eligible to bear witness, they must be of a good character, learned, and for fear of punishment, always truthful. However, only women can be witnesses for women, the twice born for the twice born, Shudras for Shudras, and outcasts for outcasts. Before bearing witness, the judge must warn them that they should not destroy the purity of their souls and future rebirths by telling untruths, as their conscience, the Supreme Spirit, constantly watches them. The judge should, however, be mindful not to examine too strictly witnesses' competence in cases of violence, theft, adultery, the use of abusive language and assault because of their private nature and difficulty in finding witnesses. In the case of contradictory evidence, the evidence of the majority must be accepted, and that in particular of altruistic teachers of humanity. Evidence. Two kinds of evidence are admissible: what has been seen, what has been heard by the witnesses. Judges should, with varying degrees of severity, financially punish those witnesses who give false evidence through love, fear, anger, ignorance, and childishness. Fines should be levied with due regard to the offender's means, the time and place and nature of the offense, and his general character and position. The poorer the offender, the lesser the fine, and the richer the offender, the greater the fine should be. Punishment of lesser offences. In general, punishment for lesser offences following Manusmriti should always be gradual and proportionate. For the first offence, punishment should be gentle. The second, a harsh reproof. The third, a pecuniary fine. And the fourth, corporeal chastisement, such as flogging and caning, or by imprisonment or death penalty. The latter punishment may be inflicted on the private parts, back, tongue, hands, feet, eyes, ears, nose, and the whole body. The removal of limb or limbs with which a crime has been committed, regardless of whether it be of a friend, family member, or spiritual teacher, should be ordered by the king to set an example to others and prevent the repetition of the same crime. The king and government officials, however, should be punished more severely than ordinary people to avoid them tyrannizing them. Punishment of serious offences. In order to continuously protect the state's wealth, prosperity, and security, punishment in the case of adultery and violent crimes should be more immediate than crimes of theft and slander. Offers of friendship, immense wealth, should never stop a king from punishing such terrorizing criminals with imprisonment or death. In cases of adultery, the cheating wife should be condemned by the king to being devoured by dogs before the people. A cheating husband should be burnt alive publicly on a red-hot iron bed. For extremely heinous crimes, such as murder, other than in self-defense, etc., no sin is committed if the convicted criminal, convicted of murder, is executed publicly or privately. As Maharshi says, doing thus is like opposing anger with anger. Light punishments fail to check crime, and in the long run multiply crime 1,000-fold. An excellent king, according to Manu, is he in whose kingdom thieves, adulterers, slanderers, perpetrators of atrocious violence, and transgressors of the law don't exist. If the king or the queen, the Lord Chief Justice, or his wife, influential people, commit wicked crimes such as adultery, murder, they should be punished even more severely than other people by the assembly or the court of justice. To see them go free would undermine justice and righteousness. The depths of injustice and lawlessness that a country would sink into would ruin the people as well as themselves. Maharshi, in concluding this section on the Vedic legal system, reminds us that the law alone is the true king, the true religion. The Indian legal system. During British colonial rule, laws were made generally for the financial and personal benefit of the colonizers, and in order to prevent the colonized from rebelling. The law wasn't there to deliver the kind of natural justice that was inbuilt within the Vedic legal system. Natural justice had to be demanded and prayed for, and was inaccessible to the ordinary Indian. The law often under the British was used against the people to retain a cruel foreign dictatorship. Indeed, the Prachar and freedom-fighting activities of the Arya Samaj itself were regularly challenged on the basis of British sedition, treason, and blasphemy laws, and its stalwarts imprisoned, transported for life, or hanged or executed. Ironically, the British in 1946 had to commute its own legal ruling after the Red Fort trials due to the widespread mutiny and rebellion in the armed forces. Nearly 75 years after these events triggered Indian independence, India unfortunately still retains its British legal system, and many controversial and unsuitable British colonial laws, like the Salt Act 1953, Indian Penal Code 1860, Transfer of Property Act 1882, Indian Police Act 1861, Indian Evidence Act 1872, Income Tax Act 1960, among many others, still exist. In 2021, there are around 5 million cases pending in the Indian High Courts and around 38 million cases pending in the Indian District Courts, making a staggering total of 43 million cases that are pending. There are also not enough judges to hear these cases due to many vacancies. Quite clearly, the Indian legal system, a legacy of British colonial rule, is not fit for purpose. In overhauling it, it should look to the humane and divinely inspired Vedic legal system to provide real justice to its citizens, and it should hold even the lawmakers and the king fully accountable always to the law, which it currently doesn't adequately do. British draining of the Indian economy. The draining of Indian wealth through the destruction of the Indian economy during and after Mughal rule continued under the British Crown. The British Raj refined its wealth extraction systems and policies by weakening and closing down most of its industries, namely textiles, and exporting the raw materials to Britain and then importing the finished goods from Britain into India. It taxed India's population heavily, and all these unjust measures contributed to large-scale inflation in India, which resulted in mass poverty. One recent estimate of the extent of the economic devastation caused during this period to Indians is $45 trillion, and even this is considered to be a conservative estimate. The Vedic economy. Although the Vedic administration and the Vedic legal system also runs on money and wealth generated through tax revenue, its functioning in comparison is just and equitable. The king, the Maharshi, explains, having appointed honorable, trustworthy, and accomplished tax collectors of excellent characters who can faithfully discharge their duties according to their regulations, should extract from the people annual taxes little by little, like the suckling calf and the bee take their food, as excessive taxation is destructive and brings great sorrow. From tradespeople and artisans, 1/50th part of their profit should be taken in silver and gold, and 1/6, 1/8, or 1/12 of agricultural produce should be taken of rice. If taken in the form of cash, then the king should ensure that none of his people are reduced to poverty, hunger, because when the people are rich, healthy, and have an abundance of the necessities of life, the king flourishes. Farmers and other wealth producers are regarded as being the real source of kingly power, and the king is their guardian. The promotion of all-round happiness through fair, proportionate taxation is paramount to maintain this vital, interdependent relationship. Similarly, on sea canals, bays, rivers, and even the wide open sea, the king should impose tolls on all ships and boats passing up and down, but only proportionate to the length of the area crossed, or at their discretion for those traveling at sea. In both cases, laws should be mutually beneficial, both to the state and the proprietors of ships. So the king should take a proactive role in increasing the state's wealth. Always through lawful means, he should diligently protect it, increase it by investing profitably, spend this increased wealth for the happiness and welfare of the people and the state. Indian taxation system. Independent India today has a thriving economy, but its tax system is based on a multi-layered direct and indirect tax system, which is still largely based on the old British system. Although through its tax revenue, Indian government officials, infrastructure, schools, defense, etc. are paid for, the rate of tax non-compliance and tax evasion is too high, and collective tax collection is too little. Agricultural income, the main wealth producer, is not taxed at all. The Indian government, seeking its citizens' happiness and welfare, should, following the Vedic model, provide better services, infrastructure, and better paid public servants by distributing taxes evenly so that the poor are taxed the least and the rich, including those in the agricultural sector, if very wealthy, are taxed the most. However, the number of taxes and their rates should be reduced so that all sections have more than enough to live prosperously and happily according to dharma. The British Army in India. Prior to 1857, the British Army had predominantly recruits from Brahmin and Kshatriya Bengali and North Indian families. As the East India Company's victories were largely concentrated in the areas where they were from. After the First War of Independence, however, soldiers were deliberately taken from very different backgrounds, religions and places in India, so that soldiers could not easily unite and revolt against British officers as they had done previously. This new mixed British army, firmly under British control, was at the time of Maharshi Dayanand's Ved Prachar work and the writing of the Satyarth Prakash, heavily involved in suppressing domestic Indian dissent and also in wars in Afghanistan. The costs of maintaining the British Army and all its battles were, needless to say, all borne very unjustly by Indian taxpayers. The Vedic army. Maharshi Dayanand, in contrast, envisaged a truly indigenous army that would strongly protect its native and just king, his administration, the people, and the country's wealth in order to be stable and happy. Here Maharshi Dayanand, quoting Rigved, says, "Let your army be a glorious one, so that you may always be victorious. Kshatriyas should in particular be physically strong and possess well-developed bodies. Let their implements of warfare and war materials be worthy of praise, strong and durable to repel and conquer your enemies. Let him always protect his subjects, even if they go to different foreign lands. Let them never suffer in any way." Starting with domestic defense, the king should, as a necessity, set up his kingdom in a thickly wooded country with rich soil. The town should be surrounded by either a fortress of earth, water, a thick wood on all sides of armed men, or one surrounded by a mountain. A walled city well supplied with arms, ammunition, grains, foodstuffs, animals, vehicles, machines, should have teachers and preachers. Artisans can be easily protected by brave, well-armed soldiers. In the town center, a government house should be built and be well protected from all weathers. For all the state functions, large, well-provided parks and gardens, well supplied with water, should be created. The king and the ambassador. Of all the king's administration, the ambassador alone has the important duty of ensuring peace and war. He should strive to divide enemies united against his country, and having learnt the enemy's designs, the king, the president of the assembly, assembly members, ambassadors, and others should endeavour to guard themselves from danger. The king, after consulting him and others, should, as the occasion demands, adopt one or more of the 6 following measures. Firstly, he should choose either to remain passive. Secondly, march to action. Thirdly, make peace with the enemy. Fourthly, declare war against wicked enemies. Fifthly, gain victory by dividing his forces. Sixthly, seek the protection of or alliance with a powerful king. The king, when faced with such measures, should take heed of the Dharma Shastra, which states that the king who is a true statesman should adopt such measures so that neither his allies, neutral powers, nor his foes may grow in power or gain any great advantage over him. He should think thoroughly over the advantages and disadvantages of his past actions, his present and future duties. He should work to ward off evils and promote good results. A king will never be defeated by his enemies if he can foresee the good and evil results that are likely to follow from future measures, and who acts immediately according to his convictions in the present, being aware of his past failings. In and off the battlefield, the king should be able to distinguish between a firm, loving, far-seeing dharmic friend, a double-crossing false friend, and a neutral party by engaging trustworthy spies and using his own discerning judgment. He should destroy all treacherous protectors or allies and never make an enemy of a just and virtuous friend. A neutral should be recognized as he who is neither friend nor foe, but who, although secretive, is possessed of good qualities. In the case of a foe, he should employ the 4-fold principle of Sam, Dam, Dand, Bhed. Persuade, purchase, punish, and exploit the weaknesses. If he fails to restrain foes by these means, he should resort to war. Rules and duties of war. A king devoted to the welfare of his people, having declared war as a last resort, should then, regardless of the enemy's strength, do his Kshatriya duty and fight skillfully, fearlessly to ensure victory. He should order the destruction of reservoirs, city walls, enemy trenches, alarm the enemy by night, and adopt measures to defeat him. However, when necessary to obtain victory over the enemy, he should employ all kinds of tactics, including retreating and hiding away. A cowardly soldier killed by an enemy while retreating, however, deserves to be punished for his disloyalty to his master. He alone is rewarded in this birth and the next who fights faithfully. The dutiful soldier should, moreover, never strike a non-combatant, a eunuch, someone who begs for peace or mercy, whose hair is covering his eyes or unconscious, disarmed, nor one who is naked, in agony due to his wounds, invalid or terrified, or is running away. However, he should be mindful at the same time never to reveal his vulnerable weak points to any of his foes. Duties in victory. Having conquered his foe, a treaty should be signed by him, and if necessary, he should be deposed, and another righteous man appointed from the same dynasty as the king. The newly appointed king, under the conquering king's men's supervision, should sign a document that orders will be carried out, a just system of government will be adopted, and that the people will be served and protected. Prisoners of war should never be taunted nor laughed at, and even reminded of their defeat. They should be provided with food, drink, and other necessities. The wounded should be medically attended to, and once fit, should be employed in suitable work. The king should especially see that no woman, child, elderly, wounded, or injured and vulnerable person is struck. They should be honored with gifts and treated with respect, as not only is this the right thing to do, but also it removes hatred from defeated foes' hearts and fosters love and happiness. Their children, especially daughters or sisters, should be given the utmost respect and never violated. So the king should always watch his troops' behavior to ensure their faithful discharge of duties. Once the country has settled down, only those who are threats to the kingdom should be kept in prison and not allowed to go home. With regards to the spoils of war, the captors should give a 16th part to the king, and he in turn should distribute a 16th part of what was collectively taken among the whole army. Deceased soldiers' wives and children should have their shares and be well looked after, and when suitable, be offered suitable state appointments. As can be seen, the Vedic approach to the kingdom's defense is based on firm ethics and morals, as well as tactics that can be employed to further these values. Kshatriyas, for this reason, are required to be physically strong and possess well-developed bodies through the adherence to brahmacharya. Lascivious, loose morals irrevocably ruins the country's government and defense. In concluding, Maharshi quotes the proverb, "As is the king, so shall the people be," in emphasizing that the king and other high personages should never misconduct themselves, but instead always set a good example to others in the matter of just and righteous living. Indian defense. Indian soldiers who fought for the British rulers were vital in all of Britain's military campaigns over 2 centuries. So while Swami Dayanand and his immediate followers were alive, the Vedic concept of military defense was not unfortunately applied. However, under the inspired intellectual leadership of people like Veer Savarkar, Rash Bihari Bose, and Subhash Chandra Bose, many Indian men fought against the British and helped secure India's independence. It is a shame that on partition, however, India gained 2 enemies as neighbors, and the main advisors of the Indian Armed Forces until the 1960s were British officers. However, despite this, India militarily has held its own against Pakistan on several occasions, albeit with an underfunded, largely outdated military infrastructure and equipment and political interference. India's military, which is today the 2nd largest in the world, arguably, however, is not as capable as it should be to combat its greatest threat, China. Maharshi Dayanand's vision of strong, well-armed, contented armed forces, guided by superior intelligence agencies and a highly motivated political administration, investing heavily in its indigenous military infrastructure for the ultimate security and happiness of the nation, has unfortunately, it seems, yet to be fully realized. Conclusion. Undoubtedly, Maharshi Dayanandji's 6th Samullas on the science of government did significantly influence so many Indians to strive for independence and establish a more just indigenous government. However, while much has been achieved nearly 75 years after the British left, the British administrative, legal, economic, and military legacies embedded within the Indian framework still prevent India from achieving the harmonious and dharmic Vedic government of its illustrious ancestors. Education from the grassroots level up is, in my view, the most important means to changing this unfortunate situation. The complete reinstitution of the Vedic Gurukul education system and proper investment in all the arts and sciences, modern and ancient, will I believe, first truly awaken and revitalize the youth, the future of the nation, about the existing flawed system, and secondly, will provide them with solid solutions and means to achieve positive change. I hope in my lifetime I get to see this awakening and the peaceful transition to a true Vedic government, not only in Aryavart, but all over the world, as it truly is the birthright of the whole of humanity. I would like to finish this evening's talk with a mantra from the Rig Veda. In this mantra, Paramatma says to his devotees, Yo Vishwasya Jagataha Pranataspatiryo Brahmane Prathamo Ga Avindat Indro Yo Dasyura Dhara Avatarin Murutvantam Sakyaya Havamahe. O devotees, let us invoke for friendship the master of infinite power, Indra, the mighty Lord, for he is the ruler of the whole universe, comprising of the inanimate and the living world, and the first of all in this universe. It is he alone who confers upon the learned the sway over earth, and it is he who brings down and exterminates evil-minded people. I hope this mantra serves as an inspiration for all right-minded people to endeavor to restore governance in compliance with Paramatma's Vedic laws. Dhanyavad. Namaste.